Welcome back everyone, it's been a long time. Today I'm going to be reviewing India after Gandhi. As you could see, it was a fat book, and that's why it has so many pages in it. It is around almost 800 pages in text, and then there are notes of around 120 pages. So many notes, which shows that the author did so much research that the notes themselves came into only 120 pages. And this book is very exhaustive in itself. It tells the history of almost 70 years of India, in the sense that it starts from independence and goes till the NDA government of present came into power. Um, and it is divided into 30 chapters and 5 parts. Before the chapters start, there is a prologue. The prologue is titled Unnatural Nation. Um, in this, the author talks about how when the India was about to be independent, or there were many calls for the independence of India, there were so many people who said that India in itself is so diverse that the moment British leave, India, because of its diversity, would be divided into so many parts that we will not even be able to count. It would not ever be able to remain steadfast together as a nation. And that's something that the author starts to talk about, how the the idea of India itself was so vague that nobody was able to completely believe in it. That the moment British, they believe that the the glue that sticks India together is Britishers. The moment they leave, India will be disintegrated. And now let's come to the parts. The first part is titled rightly as Picking Up the Pieces, and the first chapter in this part is Freedom and Parricide. Now, freedom, in the sense, the author talks about certainly the independence of India when the India became independent, but parricide means the killing of one's own father or some very near relative. Here, the parricide is about the killing of the father of the nation of India, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and here the author talks about all the happenings that happened during that period. Then the second chapter is about the logic of division. Here, the author discusses the history of all of the calls for partition, or for the and how it was affected, who when first raised the calls for the partition of India, and then the creation of Pakistan. For example, Pakistan was first called for in 1930, and so on. Then the third chapter is called Apples in the Basket. Now, these apples in the basket are the princely states, the merging of after which India was created. And here the author gives very interesting stories about how Junagadh and Hyderabad and J&K were some of the states who did not, even who had not signed the document of accession, instrument of accession, even after the Independence Day, and that's why their status in the Union of India was very vague, and there was also some anxiety about their status as to where they would go. Then the fourth chapter is titled as A Valley, Bloody and Beautiful. Now, certainly, this is the reference to Kashmir, and the author in this chapter tells about the whole story of accession of Kashmir to India. Then the fifth chapter is called Refugees and the Republic. Now, when the partition happened, there were so many refugees who came to India from Pakistan and who went to Pakistan. So this is the story of all of the refugees and how they were accommodated in India when they came to India after the partition was effected. The sixth chapter is titled as Ideas of India. Now, this is the idea of India, is the idea that the founding fathers and mothers of this nation had in their mind, and that's how the constitution was created. This chapter tells about the story of the Constituent Assembly and how the constitution came into being. Part 2 of the book is titled as Nehru's India, and the seventh chapter in the book is The Biggest Gamble in History. It's about the first elections that took place in India, and how how India's democracy was actually turned into action. And then the author talks about how Congress won 489 seats in India in the parliament elections, in the Lok Sabha elections, and then it won 2,247 seats in the state assembly elections. So this chapter is also very interesting in the sense that it's about the first elections. Now the eighth chapter in the book is about home and the world. This chapter is about Nehru's particular interest in international affairs and how he you know he dealt with these international affairs, because he was one of the longest serving prime ministers of India, and as long as he served as the prime minister, he was also the external affairs minister for India. He also propounded this theory of policy of non-alignment, and he also just after some years of independence, he also conducted this conference called Asian Relations Conference, and this conference was able to bring about 20 representatives of different countries to India, and these countries also supported Nehru's theory of policy of independence very vehemently. And that's how this chapter talks about how Nehru dealt with the world while India was still a very young republic. Then there's ninth chapter. Ninth chapter talks about redrawing of the map. Now this is the internal redrawing of the maps of states of India. There are very many interesting stories about how the states came to be divided on the basis of linguistic basis rather than on any other basis, which could have caused so many issues. And there's this also interesting thing that Nehru was never in support of division of states on the basis of linguistic linguistic basis, but he had to concede to the demands. Now the 10th chapter is titled as The Conquest of Nature. Now this is about the nature of India. So much diversity is there. The author talks about it was to be decided as to what would be the nature of Indian Republic, what would be the kind of economic policies that would be adopted by the government, what could be the kind of governance that the state would be the kind of model of governance that the state would be adopting. Then what kind of industrialization India would allow. So we know already that until before 1991, India was a planned economy, not an open economy. Everything was very regulated. So all of these decisions had to be made. Chapter 11th is titled as The Law and the Prophets. This is about the fundamental question that was there before the country as to how India could be made into a secular republic, whereas everybody in this country is so religious. Then there came about Article 44 in the Constitution, which called for uniform civil code. Then there was also bills were passed like Hindu Code Bill. Ambedkar was in vehement opposition to it. Then there were so many other bills like Hindu Marriage Act and Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act that were passed. The author tells about all of it in great detail. The next chapter, chapter 12th, is titled as Securing Kashmir. Now this chapter talks about how there was always this question of how India, which is mostly Hindu majority state, would be able to adopt and accept and accommodate a Muslim majority state. So here the author talks about the whole of the story of how Kashmir was secured by India, how Sheikh Abdullah was appointed as the chief minister in 1949, but then was also arrested in 1953. The author also talks about various other things as to all of the dispute that happened with Kashmir. 1950, the UN intervened and asked also for that India and Pakistan both withdraw their armies, and also there were this thing about plebiscite. You can read it in the book. The third chapter is called as Tribal Trouble. Now this chapter talks about how when India became independent, there were so many tribes, especially Naga tribe, which wanted autonomy, even independence, and didn't want it to be didn't want to come under the Union of India, and all of that problem was happening. The author tells that story as well. Then comes the third part of the book, and it's called Shaking the Center. 14th chapter in the book is called the Southern Challenge. Now when India became independent, India's the wave in India, in northern India, was very different from the wave in the southern India. Now, for example, in Kerala there was this communist party government, whereas everywhere else in India, mostly except for the south, there were Congress governments. So in Tamil Nadu there was this Tamil Pride, DMK was founded, and that was the party that was governing over there. Then then they also talk about how there was another challenger within the Congress from the south, C. Rajagopalachari, who said that there should be, because there is no opposition, no strong opposition in the country, there should be a kind of opposition within the party, the Congress party, that should be opposing and criticizing the government for their wrong actions, which was not accepted by the Congress party. So C. Rajagopalachari also broke away and then formed another party. So the author talks about the Southern Challenge, which came to India or to the Congress party when India had just gotten independence. The 15th chapter is titled as The Experience of Defeat. Now, this is obviously about the 1962 Chinese War, as to how um, India India lost that war, and it was an issue that also made the life of the Prime Minister of India at that time, Jawaharlal Nehru, very difficult. So the author also talks about how after that war, his position in his party, in the country, and internationally also was very diminished, as to how his health also deteriorated very quickly after that. Then in the next chapter, chapter 16th, Peace in Our Times, he talks about how the Nehru government also had to give up the policy of non-alignment. It had to order arms from US, and the prime minister was very weak physically and mentally because of the fact that he had lost a war. And then because of all of this, because prime minister himself was realizing that he was maybe going to die, or maybe not keeping well, so he brought back a colleague of his, that was Pandit Shastri, who was given who was made a cabinet minister without portfolio, and he was serving as a deputy to the prime minister in a sense, and the prime minister was actually trusting him a lot. And that is the story about how um, his successor was being prepared. Now, almost half of the book contains Nehru, so that shows how Nehru was very important in establishing this country and establishing the democratic institutions in the country. That is the reason that half of the book contains Nehru, and after that, Nehru goes only when he dies. There are almost 700-800 pages in the book, and Nehru has not died till page 358. Now, um, uh, chapter 17 is about minding the minorities. Now, when this chapter starts, Nehru has died in 1964. This chapter is about how at this point in time, people are becoming apprehensive of the patriotism of the minorities. There is also rise of RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is arisen a lot today. Then the part fourth of the book starts. It is titled as The Rise of Populism. Chapter 18th is titled as War and Succession. Now, this is about the war, that 1965 war that India had with Pakistan, and this also contains so many other references like Kamraj plan, which was introduced by Kamraj so that the Congress party could be strengthened. There was also this succession issue of Kashmir, which is being discussed very at length in this chapter. And then this chapter also covers the fact that the Prime Minister has died. In 1966, Shastri has died just after he signed the Tashkent agreement with Pakistan. Then this chapter also covers the fact that Mrs. Gandhi became the new Prime Minister of India, and the chapter talks about how in 1966 the Kashmir Valley was very quiet. There was not a lot of um, trouble going on there, and a new chief minister is appointed there. His name is GM Sadiq, and th- also the fact that when Sheikh Abdullah was arrested in 1953, at that time he was the Prime Minister of Kashmir, but now it has been declared as a state in India. That's why he is now Mr. Siddiq is the Chief Minister. Chapter 19th talks about the leftward turns. Um, it talks about how in South, especially in Kerala, there is this left government. Mrs. Gandhi is turning to the left, and she is introducing welfare policies. She does bank nationalization. She has abolished the privy purses of the princes, which was later on declared as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. But she did a lot of leftward turn uh, um, as a populist measure, but also as a welfare measure. Chapter 20 is titled as the Elixir of Victory. This is about Mrs. Gandhi's victory in 1967, which she has got. And this is also the year in which first elections have happened in Pakistan, so the author also discusses about it at length. Now this is the fifth general elections that have happened in India, and Pakistan, which became independent one day before India, is conducting its first general elections. So this talks about the kind of democratic uh, democratic foundation that was there in India as compared to Pakistan. Then there is this chapter also talks about 1971 war of India with Pakistan and creation of Bangladesh, and the role of US and China in that war, and how Indira emerged as some kind of a demigod, and there is this patriotic wave throughout the country after Bangladesh has been created. Chapter 21 is titled as The Rivals. Now this is about the fact that economy is not doing very well. The literacy rate in India in 1970s is men are at 40% almost, and women are at just around 20%, and how Mrs. Gandhi's government is talking about committed judiciary, how they have superseded three judges of the Supreme Court to appoint a relatively junior judge, Justice A.N. Ray, who was the lone dissenter in the bank nationalization case, as the Chief Justice of India. How there is this Andolan kind of uh, a revolution kind of is building up against the government, which would ultimately lead to the emergency. Coming back to 1973, there is this Chhatra Sangathan Samiti, which is agitating in Bihar, which is now being led by Jayaprakash Narayan, on the condition that now it will go nationwide. So all of this is going on, and all of this is ultimately going to be pressurizing Mrs. Gandhi and the Congress, because they are agitating against Congress governments. Now in 1974, the scenario has completely changed. There is a wave against Mrs. Gandhi, and in 1974, then 1975, then she is convicted for malpractices in the elections, and one of her aide has also died on the same day, and that is the time Mrs. Gandhi is feeling that the life would not have become tougher. Now, chapter 22 is titled as Autumn of the Matriarch. Matriarch, of course, is Mrs. Gandhi. Now, this is a chapter that completely discusses about how emergency was proclaimed in India. Mrs. Gandhi went to All India Radio and announced that the president has proclaimed emergency and there is nothing to be feared about. And all of the opposition leaders have been put into jails. And Sanjay Gandhi has been emerging as the leaders of the tallest leaders of Congress, and has been doing a lot of undemocratic things. Now, chapter 22 is talking about life without the Congress. This is obviously about after 1977 elections have happened. Mrs. Gandhi has been thrown out of power, and Janata Party government has now won power, and they are investigating Mrs. Gandhi for all the excesses that she has done during the emergency period. Chapter 24 in the book is titled as Democracy in Disarray. Now this is talking about the economic crisis that the country is facing. There is also this infighting between the coalition members in the Janata Party government 1980. The government has fallen, and there are new fresh elections that are happening, and Mrs. Gandhi is back in power. And how there's this renewal of or resurgence of Naga insurgency in Nagaland, and there's no internal democracy left in the Congress, because now by 1980 she is the sole owner of Congress, and there's no internal democracy. There are so many instances that it discusses about how there's no democracy left in India, for example, democracy left in the Congress um, by that time, in the sense that she has changed the chief minister of Andhra Pradesh 4 times in 4 years, and we keep seeing such scenarios even today. But that time it was something, that was a new phenomenon that was going on. And then there's this agitation by all India Assam Students Union. They are agitating in Assam, and there's this mounting of Khalistani movements in the in the state of Punjab, wherein then she also has to undertake Operation Blue Star to control it. The chapter also talks about how then Mrs. Gandhi is assassinated by her own gunman. Uh, then the 25th chapter is titled as "The Sun Also Rises." Now, sun is SON. The sun is Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. After Mrs. Gandhi has been assassinated, Mr. Gandhi is the new Prime Minister of India. And during this period there is Bhopal gas tragedy, and there's this Shah Banu judgment, and there's a lot that the government did after that to overturn the judgment. And then this chapter also talks about the opening of lock and gate of the Babri Masjid, and the placing of an idol inside that holy place. Now, chapter 5th of the book is called by the author as historically infused journalism. Now, historians do believe that to write a history, a certain period has to be passed so that it can be written with a benefit of hindsight, and so that the evidence could be collected properly, so that there's no scope that something which could have been taken into consideration by historians was not taken into consideration. But now now the part 5th of the book is so recent that the author calls it historically infused journalism, and the name of this part is A History of Events. Now, 26th chapter in this part is titled as Rights and Riots. Herein he talks about a lot of riots that took place. First of all, Mandal Commission riots, and then riots in Tamil Nadu over a Kaveri water issue, because Karnataka government was very adamant and not even following the Supreme Court orders. So people in Tamil Nadu started to attack Kannada people living in that state. Then the author also talks about Babri Masjid dispute and the riots that happened during that period. Then chapter 27th is titled as A Multipolar Polity. In this he talks about the rise of and Kashiram and also Miss Mayawati. He also talks about 73rd and 74th Amendment to the Constitution of India, which introduced Panchayati Raj and municipalities. Then in chapter 28 is titled as Rulers and Riches. Now this talks about 1998 May. NDA government has been sworn in. Pakistan has conducted a test which is titled as Ghori. Now Indian government in reality in response to it also conducts a nuclear test. It actually conducts 5 nuclear tests in Rajasthani deserts. Then this chapter also talks about the Kargil war or conflict that happened during that period. In 1999, Parliament was dissolved and fresh elections were called. And this chapter also talks about how there was good economic growth at this point happening in the country, but people were being uplifted from below poverty line, but there were millions who were left untouched by the policies of the government, and that's why the growth of the people was not very uniform, in the sense that some people were becoming richer, but there were so many people who were living the same as they were living before. And then this chapter also talks about 2002 Gujarat riots. Chapter 29th is titled as Progress and its discontents. This chapter starts from 2004. UP has come into power, and Dr. Manmohan Singh is now the Prime Minister. There's also this constitution of very funny National Advisory Council. Nobody knows what is the basis of this council, which advises the Prime Minister or rather directs him to do something. There's this passage of RTA Act, a very good act. There's this also such a committee which has been constituted in a way um, to pastor to the Muslim community, but also it came out with very good findings about the Muslim community as to how they are far more backward than the other communities. Then the author also draws a comparison between the census between 2004 and 2007. In 2004, it was at 6,000 points, and in early 2007, it was at 14,000 points, which is more than double. So we can imagine the kind of economy, the kind of growth our economy was having at that point in time. The author also talks about how automobile and IT and pharmaceutical firms and were developing at this point in time, and also there was this nuclear deal that India signed with the US. Chapter 30 talks about the rise of the BJP system, and we are living under a BJP government right now. So the author talks about and tries to make sense of the events that happened in 2012 onwards, which led to the fall of the Congress government and the rise of the BJP. The author talks about the anti-corruption movement of Anna Hazare, and also the black money issue, which was raised very vehemently by the BJP and also Baba Ramdev. Then the author talks about the Lokpal bill. Then there was this very damning report of the CAG, which said very funnily that 1,86,000 lakh crores of money was lost to the exchequer of India because of the way coal mines were being given to the miners. Although this figure is very unbelievable. Then this chapter also talks about women, how women workforce in this in the country was declining at this point in time. So earlier more women were working. At this point in time, in 2012 or so, women were starting to leave work and were preferring to stay at home, or were not getting jobs. Then this chapter also talks about Delhi gang rape case. Modi's rise is discussed, and how in 2012 onwards he started to directly attack Congress and the Gandhis, and the Prime Minister of India at that point in time, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and that's how he made himself to be a national leader. And in 2014, he has become the Prime Minister of India, and he talks about the populist policies of the government in the sense of Swachh Bharat, Made in India, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, and FDI investments, Land Acquisition Act, GST has been passed, and he also very funnily talks about his travels abroad and his obsession with traveling abroad. And then he talks about RSS and Hindutva and Patidar and Jat reservation agitation. Then in the epilogue in the book is titled as a 50-50 democracy. He talks about very, very diverse things in this chapter, so I just can't mention what exactly he's trying to say because so much diversity. He's just talking about so many different things in this epilogue, but he's concluding in this epilogue that India is a 50-50 democracy, working democracy, but still a 50-50 democracy, not a real democracy in a real sense. And then there are almost 120 pages of notes in the book, which shows that how well researched this book is. So if you want to pick up a book which will tell you the history of India since its independence, and in great detail and in a beautiful way of storytelling, I don't think that you would ever find a more well researched and well written book. This is one of the books that I really look up to if I ever become an author. This is the book which I read in the first year of my graduation, and still I'm fascinated by it. Even yesterday when I picked it up to for this video, I was fascinated by how well this book is written. This book contains so many references from so many people to make a point. It is so well researched. There is immense literary merit in the book. The book is also funny at times. I don't think that you will ever get bored while reading this book. So, if you are interested in reading the history of India of the past 70 years, please pick up this book and you will not regret it. Thank you very much for watching my video. I'll be back next Sunday, and next Sunday I'll be reviewing Ikigai, which is a very famous book. I have finished it just yesterday, and I'll be reviewing it next week. Till then, take care, stay safe. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel.